There is a place where stone breathes and shadows listen. A living maze carved not just from rock, but from myth itself. It's a place of whispers and echoes, where every footstep is a choice, and every breath could be your last. Tonight, we step into that world together, the world of the Minotaur's Labyrinth, as we follow the journey of a young adventurer named Lyra, who dared to enter its depths in search of a legendary artifact. Her heart pounds not just with fear, but with purpose. Failure means being lost forever, swallowed by the twisting corridors and shifting walls. But success would mean more than glory. It would mean honor for her family, proof of her courage, and a story that would echo through time. We'd love to know where you're listening from right now, what part of the world you're in, and what time your own journey into this ancient tale begins. Let us know in the comments below. There's something beautiful about imagining all of us, scattered across the globe, yet connected by this same story, this same moment of quiet wonder. Because this isn't just a story about a maze. It's about what we discover when we're pushed to our limits, the sounds we learn to trust, the instincts we uncover, and the courage we find in the dark. As Lyra takes that first step into the labyrinth, the air itself seems to shift around her. The entrance looms, shadowy and vast, and the whispers of the maze are already there, not just heard, but felt. They promise greatness and threat in the same breath. Every turn could be her last. Every echo could be a guide or a trap. This is more than a test of strength. It's a test of spirit. And as we join her, we're not just observers. We're right there with her, feeling the cool stone under our fingers, hearing the soft hum of ancient magic, and wondering what waits in the depths. So settle in, breathe deep, and let's begin this journey together into the twists and turns of the Minotaur's Labyrinth. The winding path ahead seems to twist in on itself, a serpent of stone and shadow, and Lyra's enchanted compass glows with a soft, persistent light in her palm, its needle trembling as it points the way. It's a reassuring presence, a fragment of the familiar in this unsettling place, and she follows its guidance with careful steps, her boots whispering against the cool, dusty floor. For a moment, there is a rhythm to it, the gentle pulse of the compass light, the sound of her own breathing, the feeling of moving forward with a clear purpose. But the labyrinth has its own intentions. Without warning, a low, grinding rumble vibrates through the soles of her feet, a sound so deep, it's felt more than heard. The stone walls on either side groan as they begin to move, shifting inward as if the maze itself is taking a breath, and the path narrows alarmingly fast. The compass's light flickers wildly, the needle spinning in a frantic circle, useless now. Instinct takes over. Lyra throws herself forward into the only space left, a narrow, jagged gap between two converging slabs of rock. She squeezes through, the rough stone scraping against her arms and catching on her tunic, a sharp, stinging reminder that this place is alive and resistant. For a heartbeat, she is stuck, pressed between immovable forces, the air crushed from her lungs. Panic threatens, cold and sharp, but she pushes it down, focuses on the feel of the stone, and with one final, desperate effort, she stumbles through into the open space beyond. The walls slam together behind her with a definitive, thunderous crash, sealing the way she came. Disoriented and breathing heavily, she looks down at the compass in her hand. Its light has faded to a dull, dead gray. The maze has spoken its first, clear lesson. Tools can fail. Magic can be disrupted. The only true guide she can rely on in here is herself. This isn't just a structure of dead ends and wrong turns. It's a conscious adversary, testing her resolve from the very first step. To hesitate is to be trapped, to be crushed. Wiping a trace of blood from her arm, she lifts her chin, her determination hardening into something new, something more resilient. She leaves the dead compass on the ground, a small offering to the labyrinth's power, and steps forward into the deepening darkness, relying on nothing but her own senses and the will to see this through. The corridor opens into a wider passage, and the air changes, growing still and heavy with memory. It's here that Lyra first notices the walls are not blank. Etched into the stone, worn by time but still deeply carved, are stories, not written in any language she knows, but in pictures, in symbols, in the raw emotion of figures frozen in their final moments. She stops, her own breath catching in her throat, and reaches out, her fingertips gently brushing over the cold, rough surface. She traces the outline of a warrior, shield raised against an unseen foe, the lines of his form speaking of a defiant, final stand. Further along, she sees the delicate carving of a woman, reaching for a light just beyond her grasp, her face a masterpiece of sorrow and hope. Each marking is a life, a person who walked this same path, fueled by their own reasons, their own dreams. The silence around her is no longer empty. It is filled with their whispers. She can almost feel the ghost of their fear, the sharp sting of their desperation, the slow, crushing weight of their fading hope. It's a gallery of failure, a memorial to ambition that the labyrinth consumed. For a long moment, Lyra simply stands there, her own quest feeling suddenly smaller, humbled by the sheer weight of history pressing in on her. This isn't just about proving her courage or bringing honor to her family name and amour. Those motivations, once so powerful, now feel almost selfish in the face of this silent testimony. Her mission transforms in that quiet space. To succeed is not to outdo these lost souls. It is to vindicate them, to carry a piece of their hope forward, to ensure that their struggles, their very presence in this stone, were not entirely in vain. It adds a profound emotional weight to every step she takes, a solemn duty that settles on her shoulders alongside her pack. The whispers of the maze seem to swell around her, no longer just random echoes, but layered with these specific sorrows and fears, as if the labyrinth itself is watching her reaction, testing not just her bravery, but her heart. Does she have the empathy to understand their loss, the compassion to feel its depth, or will she, in her drive to succeed, become just another set of frantic scratches on the wall, another cautionary tale for the next would-be hero? Pulling her hand back from the cool stone, Lyra makes a silent promise to those who came before. She will remember them. Their stories become a part of her fuel, not a source of paralyzing fear, but a wellspring of deeper resolve. The maze, she realizes with a dawning awe, is far more than a physical trap of shifting walls and dead ends. It is a living chronicle, a psychological entity that feeds on intention and emotion. It doesn't just test your sense of direction, it tests your character. It asks what you will become when everything is stripped away. With a new, grim clarity, she turns from the etched wall and continues down the passage. The whispers seem to change tenor, shifting from a tone of mournful warning to one of observation. They are listening, waiting to see what she does with this newfound understanding. She moves forward, now not just with the strength to overcome, but with the compassion to honor, sensing that both are necessary to navigate the heart of this ancient, mythical place. The air itself seems to change around her, growing thick with sound. It starts as a faint, almost imperceptible layer beneath the silence, a soft, haunting tapestry of noise woven into the very fabric of the labyrinth. Distant, rhythmic footsteps echo from a dozen different directions at once, impossible to pinpoint. Faint, shallow breaths ghost past her ear, as if someone, or something, is walking just behind her, always staying in her blind spot. And then come the whispers. They are not words in any language she understands, but fragments of meaning, feelings given voice. A sigh of regret from the left, a murmur of encouragement from the right, a sharp hiss of warning from directly above. They are a chorus of contradictions, some seeming to guide her forward, while others scream for her to turn back. It's a disorienting, psychological onslaught designed to fracture her concentration and seed doubt deep within her mind. The maze is no longer just testing her body. It's orchestrating a symphony of confusion aimed directly at her spirit. Lyra stops, pressing her back against the cool, unforgiving stone, and does the only thing that makes sense. She closes her eyes by shutting off the visual deception of the ever-identical corridors. She forces her other senses to sharpen, to rise to the challenge. She leans into the auditory chaos, treating it not as a threat, but as a puzzle to be solved. She begins to categorize the sounds, separating them by texture and intention. The false footsteps have a hollow, metallic ring to them, a cheap imitation of life. The deceptive whispers carry a faint, staticky edge, like a poorly tuned radio signal. But beneath it all, woven through the dissonance like a golden thread, is a low, consistent hum. It has no agenda. It doesn't seek to guide or mislead. It simply is. It's a pure, resonant tone that vibrates deep in her chest, a steady, calming frequency amidst the mental storm. This, she realizes, is a real clue, a part of the maze's true, underlying energy, not a manufactured illusion designed to trick her. With her eyes still shut, she focuses everything on that hum, using it as an auditory lifeline, and begins to move, one careful step at a time, trusting the sound to lead her true. The hum grows gradually stronger, warmer, guiding her through an archway she would have otherwise missed, concealed as it was by a clever play of shadow and sound. It leads her into a small, secluded alcove, and the moment she steps inside, the cacophony of the whispering corridors falls away, replaced by a profound, peaceful silence. In the center of the space, catching a single stray beam of light from some unseen aperture high above, is a small, natural pool of crystal clear water. The gentle hum emanates from the water itself, as if the spring is singing a soft, ancient song. Relief washes over her, so potent it makes her knees feel weak. She kneels, cupping her hands and drinking deeply. The water is cool and sweet, instantly replenishing her strength and washing the dust of the labyrinth from her throat. For a few precious minutes, she simply rests, soaking in the tranquility, her body and mind grateful for the respite. But as she sits there, the unnerving nature of the experience settles back upon her. The maze didn't just throw obstacles in her path, it reached into her mind. Those whispers didn't just say random things, they echoed her own private fears, doubts about her family's legacy, insecurities about her own strength, the haunting question of whether she was truly worthy of this quest. The labyrinth wasn't just a physical space, it was a psychological one, capable of reflecting her deepest self back at her in a distorted funhouse mirror. It had used her own thoughts as weapons against her. The discovery of the alcove proves that listening deeply is the key to progressing, but it also serves as a stark warning. The maze can giveth, and it can most certainly taketh away. The line between a true clue and a devastating illusion is terrifyingly thin. Standing up, feeling stronger but emotionally raw, she commits to a new strategy. She will continue to trust her senses, to listen to the world around her with everything she has, but she will also hold a part of herself in reserve, a kernel of doubt about everything she hears and sees. She moves back out into the corridor, and the whispers immediately swell to greet her, but now they feel different. The atmosphere has intensified, the game elevated. It's no longer just about finding the right path. It's a battle for her sanity, and every sound is now a potential friend or a lethal enemy in disguise. The corridor eventually funnels her toward a choice, a stark divergence that brings her journey to a sudden, weighty pause. Ahead, the path splits into two distinct tunnels, each radiating a completely different energy. To her left, a passage bathed in a soft, golden luminescence, as if lit by a gentle, unseen sunset. It looks safe, welcoming, almost serene, promising an easy and well-lit route forward. But to her right, a tunnel swallowed by an inkai, profound darkness. There is no friendly light here, only a deep, velvety blackness that seems to absorb all sound and sight. Yet, from within that darkness comes a sensation, not a sound but a vibration, a faint, rhythmic pulse that travels through the stone floor and up into the soles of her feet. It feels like the slow, steady heartbeat of the labyrinth itself. Logic screams at her to choose the illuminated path. It appeals to every rational instinct, the primal human desire for light and the known. It is the choice of comfort, of minimized risk. But as she stands at the crossroads, Lyra finds her attention pulled relentlessly toward the dark, pulsing tunnel. The golden light feels almost too inviting, a little too perfect, like a beautiful trap. The darkness, however, with its deep, resonant thrum, feels authentic. It feels like truth. It doesn't promise safety, it promises discovery. Closing her eyes, she silences the voice of reason and listens instead to the quiet hum of her own intuition, a sense she has been learning to trust more with every turn. It pulls her, unmistakably and irresistibly, toward the unknown. Taking a final, steadying breath, she steps into the swallowing darkness of the right-hand path. The moment she crosses the threshold, the world changes. The golden light from the junction vanishes as if a door has been slammed shut, plunging her into absolute black. But almost immediately, the darkness begins to feel less like an absence and more like a presence. The rhythmic pulse she felt from outside now amplifies, vibrating through the walls and floor with a gentle, consistent intensity. It's a deeply asthma-like sensation, a low-frequency hum that resonates in her bones and soothes the frayed edges of her nerves. As her eyes adjust, she realizes the darkness is not complete. Under her fingertips, as she instinctively reaches out to steady herself against the wall, a soft, blue light begins to bloom. Where her skin touches the cold stone, intricate, glowing symbols awaken, tracing a path forward like a celestial roadmap. They are ancient and geometric, pulsing in time with the energy of the tunnel, and they fade back into darkness a few moments after she lifts her hand, only to be reactivated with her next step. She is literally painting her own way forward with her touch, guided by this mysterious, interactive light. A deep, grating rumble echoes from behind her, shaking the very foundations of the passage. She spins around, her heart leaping into her throat, only to see that the way back is gone entirely. A massive slab of stone has slid into place, sealing the junction off forever. There is no backtracking, no second guessing. The choice has been made, and the consequence is absolute. The reality of it hits her with a cold finality. Every decision in this maze carries weight, altering its structure and shaping her fate in ways that cannot be undone. She is more isolated than ever before, committed utterly to the path she chose on faith alone. But as she turns back to the glowing symbols lighting her way, a new kind of resolve hardens within her. This isn't a loss of options, it is a focusing of purpose. The vibrating energy of the tunnel, the guiding symbols under her hands, they feel less like a trap and more like an initiation. She is being led, not blindly, but toward a deeper understanding, and the only direction left to go is forward, into the humming, living heart of the labyrinth. The passage she has been following, guided by the pulsing symbols under her touch, ends not in another corridor, but in a seamless, polished archway. Stepping through it, Lyra finds herself in a place of impossible geometry, a vast, circular chamber where the very concept of solid walls seems to have been dissolved. Every surface, from the floor to the soaring, domed ceiling, is a mirror, but these are not the clear, honest mirrors of the world above. These are the labyrinth's mirrors, and they lie. Her own reflection splinters into 1,000 fractured versions of herself, each one captured in a slightly different pose, a slightly distorted expression. She takes an instinctive step forward, and the movement is multiplied, echoed, and amplified into a chaotic dance of a dozen Lyras, all moving out of sync. The visual disorientation is immediate and nauseating, a feeling compounded by the sound. Every rustle of her clothing, every faint scuff of her boot, is caught by the acoustics of the domed room and reflected back at her from all directions, layered over itself until it becomes a soft, whispering cacophony. It's impossible to tell what is a real sound and what is a delayed echo, what is a true movement and what is a deceptive reflection. A sudden, sharp grinding noise erupts from the floor directly to her left, and a section of the mirrored tiles drops away, revealing a black, bottomless pit for just a second before sliding shut again. The message is terrifyingly clear. This room is booby-trapped, and a single wrong move could be her last. Panic, cold and sharp, claws at her throat, urging her to run, to find a corner, to do something. But she forces herself to stand perfectly still, to close her eyes against the dizzying visual feedback, and just breathe. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she focuses on the one thing she can control, the rhythm of her own breath. She draws it in slowly, holds it for a count of 4, and releases it even more slowly. As she does, she begins to notice something beneath the lingering echo of the trap's activation. The room itself has a sound, a very low, almost subsonic hum, like a giant crystal being gently stroked. It's a constant, steady frequency, the chamber's true heartbeat. She matches her exhalations to this tone, slowing her heart rate, syncing her own biological rhythm to the rhythm of the room. She becomes a part of its energy, rather than an intrusion upon it. Only then does she dare to open her eyes and attempt a movement, sliding one foot forward with agonizing slowness, placing it down with the delicate precision of someone walking on ice. As she moves in this meditative, silent state, the mirrors begin to shift their purpose. They no longer show only her present form, they now show her fragments of self. One mirror to her right reflects not the determined adventurer she is trying to be, but a younger version of herself, eyes wide with fear as her father recounted the tales of those lost to the maze. Another, directly ahead, shows a triumphant, glorious Lyra holding the artifact aloft, hailed by crowds, a vision of her deepest aspiration. Yet another shows her failing, tripping, falling into darkness while her family looks on in disappointment. The room is no longer just testing her balance and her hearing. It is holding up a psychic mirror, forcing her to confront every insecurity, every vainglorious dream, and every hidden fear of inadequacy that she has carried with her into this labyrinth. The question hangs in the air, amplified by 1,000 reflections. Are you worthy? The emotional weight is crushing, far heavier than any physical obstacle she has faced. A part of her wants to scream, to argue with the images, to prove her worth through defiance, but she remembers the lessons of the whispering walls. The maze feeds on strong emotion, it twists intention. So she does not fight the visions, she acknowledges them. She looks at the fearful child and gives a slow, gentle nod of understanding. She looks at the glorious hero and sees it for the unrealistic fantasy it is. She looks at the failure and accepts it as a possibility, not a certainty. By accepting all parts of herself without judgment, she robs the mirrors of their power to destabilize her. Her calm acceptance seems to become a key. The disorienting echoes begin to coalesce, the delays aligning until the soft sounds of her movement create a coherent, repeating pattern. Step, pause, shift, till the sounds bounce from specific points in the dome, and she realizes they are not random. They are mapping a path, focusing on this auditory pattern, using it like a sonar beam in the visual chaos. She follows the sequence of echoes to a section of the wall that looks identical to all the others. Here, the returning echo has a slightly denser, woodier timbre instead of the clear ring of glass and stone. Trusting the evidence of her ears over her eyes, she presses her palm against the cool surface. With a soft, harmonious chime that is the most beautiful sound she has heard in ages, a door-sized section of the mirror swings inward, revealing a dark passage beyond. Stumbling out of the chamber of reflections, Lyra leans against the rough, blessedly solid stone of the new corridor, her body trembling with a deep, soul-level exhaustion. The physical effort was minimal, but the psychological toll has been immense. She feels emotionally scraped raw, as if the mirrors didn't just show her images, but reached in and touched her very spirit. The encounter has fundamentally altered her understanding of the labyrinth's nature. It is not merely a physical challenge with psychological elements. The psychology is the challenge. The shifting walls and clever traps are just the outer shell. The true battle is fought in the mind, against one's own personal demons that the maze so expertly conjures and amplifies. She knows now that to survive what comes next, she will need more than courage and strength. She will need an unshakable sense of self, a peace forged in the chaotic heart of her own fears. Wiping a weary hand across her forehead, she pushes herself upright. The door to the chamber has sealed shut behind her, its mirrored surface once again a perfect, impenetrable illusion. There is no going back. There is only the path ahead, and the chilling certainty that the labyrinth has only just begun to test her. The gentle, rhythmic hum of the labyrinth's energy, which had become a kind of background comfort to her journey, is suddenly and violently overwritten by a new, terrifying cadence. It begins as a distant tremor, a deep, rhythmic thud that vibrates up through the soles of her boots. Footsteps, but these are not the light, deceptive echoes the maze had conjured before to mislead her. These are real. They are heavy, impossibly so, each one landing with the weight and finality of a falling monolith, sending a shiver through the very bones of the labyrinth. A moment later, the sound is joined by another, a low, wet, resonant breathing, a deep inhalation and exhalation that rasps like stone grinding against stone. It is the sound of a massive chest, expanding and contracting, the sound of a predator that is not just near, but aware. The Minotaur is no longer a myth lurking in the deeper reaches of the maze. It is here, it is hunting. Every muscle in Lyra's body locks in a primal instinct to freeze. She flattens herself against the cold, unyielding stone of the wall, pressing her cheek into its rough surface, trying to make herself a part of the architecture, to disappear into the shadows. Her own breath catches in her throat, held hostage by a fear so potent it feels like a physical weight on her chest. In the absolute silence she forces upon herself, the beast's sounds become the entire universe. And it is in this hyper-focused state of terror that a crucial realization dawns. The maze asthma-like environment, which she had learned to use for guidance, is now her only shield. The very sounds that signal her doom are also the tools for her survival. She cannot see the creature, but she can listen to it with an intensity she never knew she possessed. She closes her eyes, surrendering her sight to better read the auditory map. The heavy footfalls are not just noise, they are information. The volume and the distinct quality of the echo tell her the beast is still 2, perhaps 3 corridors away. The deep, rasping breaths are slightly out of sync with the steps, indicating the creature is moving its great head, scanning, sniffing the air for her scent. The vibrations through the wall are even more telling. She feels the deeper thuds resonate more strongly through the stone on her right side, suggesting the Minotaur is approaching from a passageway that branches off in that direction. This is no longer about finding a path forward. It is a deadly game of auditory triangulation, a desperate attempt to plot the monster's movements in her mind's eye, so she can plot her own escape in the opposite direction. Panic is a luxury that would mean instant death. Its siren call is to run, to scramble blindly, to make noise and reveal her position in a frantic burst of activity. But that is what the labyrinth and the Minotaur within it expect. That is what all the others before her must have done. So she makes a conscious, incredibly difficult choice. She chooses silence. She chooses patience. She forces her breathing to slow, to become shallower than the beasts, to make no sound whatsoever. She begins to move, but it is not a run, it is a glide. She lifts each foot with excruciating care, placing it down with the sensitivity of a leaf landing on the forest floor, testing the ground for any loose stone or debris before shifting her weight. She becomes a ghost in the stone halls, her progress measured in inches per minute, her entire world reduced to the dual input of what her ears tell her and what the vibrations through the wall communicate. For a few agonizingly long minutes, the strategy works. The Minotaur's footsteps seem to recede slightly, turning down a different tunnel. A flicker of relief, fragile and thin, begins to form. But it is instantly shattered by a new sound, the slow, grating scrape of a great horn, dragging against a wall very, very close by. The beast had been quieter than she realized, and it is far nearer than its footsteps had indicated. It was a lesson in the maze deceit. Even real sounds can be manipulated by the labyrinth's tricky acoustics. The tension doesn't just heighten, it becomes a wire stretched to its breaking point inside her. Every tiny shift of her clothing, every faintest click of a joint in her knee, every beat of her own heart suddenly sounds like a thunderclap in the overwhelming silence. Evading the Minotaur is no longer a single action. It is a continuous, critical state of being where every single step, every single breath, is a calculated risk that could mean the difference between life and a swift, brutal end. The hunt is well and truly on, and she is the prey. After the heart-pounding tension of evading the Minotaur's approach, the corridor Lyra slips into offers a stark and sudden contrast, opening into a vast, silent chamber that seems to swallow all sound. The air is still and cool, heavy with the scent of ancient dust and something else, something like ozone, the electric tang of energy waiting to be released. The room is a masterpiece of celestial mechanics, a grand, slow dance of light and shadow. High above, hidden apertures in the dome ceiling allow narrow, brilliant beams of sunlight to slice through the darkness, moving with a glacial but precise slowness. They sweep across the floor in a complex, interweaving pattern, illuminating specific hexagonal tiles for a few moments before passing on, plunging them back into an inky blackness that seems absolute. The patches of darkness between the beams are not merely absent light. They feel like voids, pockets of nothingness that seem to suck the warmth from the air around them. The entire floor is a checkerboard of potential traps, and the message is implicit: step only into the light. For a long moment, Lyra simply stands at the threshold, her body still thrumming with the adrenaline of the near miss, and she forces herself to breathe, to calm the frantic beating of her heart. To rush into this would be catastrophic. She watches, her eyes tracing the paths of the beams, and that is when she first hears it. The light itself has a sound. As each beam travels, it emits a soft, high-frequency hum, almost like a finger tracing the rim of a crystal glass. When the light lands on a tile and holds its position for its brief moment, the hum solidifies into a clear, pure, resonant tone, a single musical note that hangs in the air before fading as the light moves on. The patches of darkness, in contrast, are utterly silent, a deadness that feels heavier and more ominous than any noise. The entire room is a slow, shifting symphony of soft, ethereal notes, an Asmr soundscape that is both incredibly beautiful and fatally dangerous. It is the maze's most cruel and elegant trick yet. To survive, She must find peace and focus within a situation designed to induce panic. She must lean into the calming sounds to navigate a literal death trap. She begins to map the pattern, not with her eyes alone, but with her entire being, syncing her breathing to the languid pace of the moving light. The sequence is not random. It's a rhythm, a slow, repeating cadence of illumination and shadow. She identifies a starting tile, a hexagon that glows with a steady, reassuring C note for a full 5 seconds before the light sweeps away. This is her opening. She times her first step, placing her boot squarely in the center of the tile, just as the tone reaches its peak resonance. The tile holds firm. She doesn't pause. Her mind is now wholly engaged, calculating the next step in the sequence. She becomes a conductor of her own movement, her body an instrument in the Labyrinth's orchestra. She steps forward onto a tile, just as it chimes with a soft D, then pivots left onto another, singing an E, her movements a fluid dance, dictated by the slow, shifting melody of the light. She doesn't fight the rhythm, she joins it, her entire consciousness narrowing to the input of her ears and the precise placement of her feet. The world outside this room, the Minotaur, the whispers, the crushing weight of the stone, all of it falls away. There is only the next note, the next step, the next island of safety in a sea of perilous dark. The path across is long and mentally draining, a test of sustained concentration that pushes her focus to its absolute limit. Halfway across, a misjudgment nearly ends everything. She commits to a tile that looks illuminated, but her foot lands a fraction of a second after the light has passed, the pure tone cutting off into that awful, hungry silence. The tile under her foot gives a sickening lurch, dropping an inch with a grating stone-on-stone sound that screams of imminent collapse. She throws her weight forward onto her front foot, yanking her back foot off the treacherous tile just as it seals itself back into place, the mechanism resetting with a final, grim click. The near disaster sends a cold shock through her system, a brutal reminder of the stakes, but instead of shattering her focus, it sharpens it to a razor's edge. Her movements become even more precise, more economical, every ounce of her willpower poured into the simple, impossible act of walking across a room. When her final step lands on the solid, unmoving stone of the far ledge, the symphony of light and sound doesn't stop, but a section of the wall before her slides back with a deep, harmonious chord, as if the room itself is applauding her performance. The passage beyond is open. Lyra stumbles through it, her legs suddenly weak and trembling, not from physical exertion, but from the sheer mental toll of the crossing. She slumps against the wall, sliding down to sit on the cool floor, her head in her hands. Her muscles ache with a peculiar fatigue, the kind that comes from holding every part of yourself tense and controlled for minutes on end. The encounter has left her emotionally and mentally scraped raw. The maze design is now horrifyingly clear to her. It isn't just a series of obstacles, it is a grinding wheel. It is meticulously engineered to wear down intruders, to exhaust their bodies, fray their nerves, and drain their mental reserves through a relentless series of tests that demand perfection. Each challenge leaves you a little weaker, a little more vulnerable for the next, greater one. This room required more than bravery or strength. It required an almost supernatural level of sensory sharpness and enduring focus. As she sits there in the quiet dark, trying to reclaim her scattered energy, a chilling certainty settles over her. This was merely a preparation. The maze was sharpening her senses, yes, but it was also draining her reserves. Whatever lies ahead will require everything she has left, and then some. The corridor she had been following gradually widened, its rough-hewn walls giving way to a smoother, almost polished surface that seemed to hum with a latent energy. Lyra stepped into a new chamber, and the change in atmosphere was immediate and profound. This was no place of looming terror or disorienting illusion. It felt ancient, sacred, and strangely serene. The air was still and carried the faint, sweet scent of petrichor and old stone, like a garden after a rain, though not a single living plant grew here. Instead, the walls themselves were a garden, a breathtaking tapestry of stone, carved with such intricate detail that it seemed impossible for mortal hands to have created it. Delicate, vine-like patterns coiled and intertwined across every inch of the chamber, each tendril and leaf rendered with a hyper-realistic precision that made them appear to be frozen in a gentle breeze. And they were not silent. As she moved closer, her own soft footfalls echoing in the hushed space, she realized the carvings were the source of the gentle, melodic hum that filled the air. It was a chorus of faint, overlapping tones, as if the stone itself was singing a slow, patient song that had been playing for millennia, waiting for someone to truly listen. Drawn by the sound and the beauty of the carvings, Lyra reached out, her fingertips hesitating just before they made contact. What if it was a trap? The memory of the shifting walls and the mirror chamber was still fresh, a raw nerve of caution. But the hum seemed to swell slightly, not in warning, but in invitation. It felt friendly. She let her fingers brush against a curling stone vine, and the moment her skin met the cool, smooth mineral, the hum localized directly under her touch, coalescing into a clear, pure, bell-like note that hung in the air for a second before fading back into the general chorus. A shiver of wonder, not fear, ran down her spine. She tried another vine a few inches away, and a different note sounded, slightly lower in pitch. A third touch produced a harmonious chord. This was not a test of survival. It was a puzzle of music. The Labyrinth, for the first time, was asking her to play, not to fight. Emboldened, she began to explore the wall more deliberately, tracing the paths of the carved vines with her fingers like a musician learning an instrument. She discovered that the vines were not random. They flowed in specific sequences, and when she followed a particular path from its start to its end, touching each raised leaf and tendril in order, the individual notes would combine into a brief, beautiful melody that resonated deep in her chest. Each completed melody caused a section of the wall to glow with a soft, golden light for a moment before fading. She lost track of time, completely engrossed in this tactile, auditory exploration. The act was meditative, a balm on her frayed nerves. She was no longer a trespasser. She was a participant, collaborating with the maze itself to create something beautiful. It felt like a gift, a moment of grace in her arduous journey. She found one sequence that was more complex than the others, a central vine that wove through several others like a main artery. Following its path required concentration and a gentle, precise touch. As she traced its final curve, the notes she produced didn't just form a melody. They layered into a perfect, resonant chord that seemed to shake the very dust from the air. The harmonious tone held, swelling in volume until it filled the entire chamber. Then, with a soft, grinding sound that was not harsh but purposeful, a small, perfectly square section of the wall, previously invisible amidst the carvings, slid inward and then aside. Revealed within the shallow alcove was a single object, a fragile-looking piece of aged parchment, rolled into a tight scroll and tied with a faded cord. Her heart leaped. A map, a genuine guide in this place of endless turns. Carefully, almost reverently, she reached in and retrieved it, the paper feeling brittle and incredibly ancient under her fingers. She had done it. She had solved the puzzle and earned a reward, a genuine, untainted victory. But the labyrinth's gifts are never free. The moment the scroll left its resting place, the beautiful, harmonious hum of the Garden of Stone ceased abruptly. The silence that followed was absolute and heavy, a void more threatening than any noise she had yet encountered. The golden glow from the carvings flickered and died, plunging the chamber into a deep, cold gray. Then, from the corners of the room where the shadows were thickest, new forms began to materialize. They did not step out from behind anything. They coalesced from the air itself, silent as thought. They were the spectral guardians, tall, humanoid shapes, woven from shimmering mist and deeper darkness. They had no discernible faces, only a chilling, watchful presence. They did not advance with rage or roaring threat. They simply turned toward her, their attention and almost physical pressure in the room. There was no sound, not even a footstep, as they began to glide toward her, their movements utterly silent and completely relentless. Every instinct screamed at her to look at the map, to unfurl it right there and find her salvation. But the silent, advancing figures promised no time for reading. This was not a moment for curiosity. It was a moment for flight. The lesson was as brutal as it was clear. Every boon in this place comes with a price. Every answer unlocks a new question, and every reward attracts its own guardians. Clutching the precious scroll in one hand, she turned and ran, not with the blind panic of before, but with a focused, desperate speed. She burst from the Garden of Stone, back into the familiar rough-hewn corridor, the silence of the guardians somehow feeling more menacing than the Minotaur's roar. She didn't look back, but she could feel their presence, a cold spot at the edge of her senses, and she could just barely hear the faintest echo of their passage, not a sound of movement, but a soft, collective whisper, like dry leaves skittering over stone, fading slowly behind her as she put distance between them. Only when she had rounded two corners and the chill on her neck had subsided did she allow herself to slow, her chest heaving. She looked down at the scroll in her hand, its promise now tempered by a hard-earned wisdom. The map was a key, but using it would require more than just intellect. It would require the patience to know when to stop and study, and the courage to know when to run. She carefully slipped the scroll into her pack, its weight a new kind of responsibility. The garden had given her a tool, but it had also given her its most valuable lesson yet. In the labyrinth, wonder and danger are two vines growing from the very same root. The path she had been following, still humming with the residual energy of her narrow escape, ended abruptly at a void. One moment, her boots were on solid, dusty stone. The next, she stood at the precipice of an immense chasm, so vast its other side was lost in a hazy, indistinct gloom. The air here was different, colder, thinner, and alive with movement. A constant, ethereal wind flowed up from the unimaginable depths below, carrying with it a chorus of soft, haunting sounds. It whistled through unseen fissures in the rock, creating high, fluting notes that intertwined with lower, cello-like drones. The overall effect was deeply asthma-like, a natural, atmospheric symphony that was at once profoundly soothing and deeply unsettling. It was the sound of emptiness given voice, a beautiful song composed by a bottomless abyss. Spanning this terrifying gorge was the bridge itself, and the sight of it made her breath catch in her throat. It was not built of stone or sturdy timber, but appeared to be woven from petrified vines and ancient, bleached ropes, all coated in a thin, glistening layer of crystalline frost that caught the faint, ambient light. It was impossibly narrow, barely the width of her own shoulders, with low, fragile-looking handrails that seemed more symbolic than functional. The entire structure looked less like an engineered crossing and more like a spider's web, a delicate, temporary thing that had been spun across the void and then frozen in time. It swayed gently, almost imperceptibly, in the constant updraft, its movements a silent dance with the wind that had created its eerie music. There was no other way forward. To turn back was to surrender, to admit that the Guardians or the Minotaur or the maze itself had finally won. The map fragment in her pack felt heavy, a silent promise that there was something worth reaching on the other side. Steeling herself, Lyra placed a tentative foot on the first plank of the bridge. It creaked ominously, a sound that was swallowed instantly by the chasm below, but it held. This would be a crossing of perfect trust, a test of balance not just of the body, but of the mind and spirit. She couldn't fight the wind. It was too powerful, too constant. She had to work with it. She paused, closing her eyes for a moment, and did the only thing that made sense. She listened. She tuned out her fear and focused on the soundscape, identifying the rhythm within the chaos. The whistles weren't random. They rose and fell in a slow, predictable pattern. The bridge's sway had its own tempo, a gentle rocking that was part of the same natural system. Opening her eyes, she began to move, but this was not a walk. It was a slow, deliberate integration. She timed each step to coincide with the exhale of a particular wind current, placing her foot down as the bridge swayed toward its neutral position. She became a part of the structure's motion, her knees slightly bent, her body loose and responsive, allowing the movement to flow through her rather than resisting it. She didn't look down into the consuming blackness below. Her world narrowed to the next 6 inches of frost-rimed rope and wood, and the ever-present, whispering song of the wind. Halfway across, the point of no return, the maze decided to test her newfound harmony. Without warning, the gentle updraft intensified into a violent, gusting torrent that roared up from the depths. The soothing whistles became sharp, shrieking wails. The bridge didn't just sway, it bucked and twisted like a living thing, trying to throw her off, the ropes groaning under the sudden, brutal stress. Panic exploded in her chest, a white-hot urge to run, to scramble, to do anything but stand on this thrashing death trap. But running would mean a misstep, and a misstep would mean a long, silent fall. Instead, she dropped to a low crouch, gripping the fragile handrails for dear life, and forced her breathing back under control. She matched her ragged inhalations to the new, frantic rhythm of the wind, using the sound as an anchor in the maelstrom. The shrieks and wails were still terrifying, but by focusing on their pattern, their pitch, their very texture, she could anticipate the bridge's wildest lurches. She rode the violence like a sailor riding a storm, her body moving in a desperate, instinctual counterbalance to each new wave of motion. It was the ultimate act of trust, not in the bridge, but in her own ability to listen and adapt. As suddenly as it had begun, the gusting subsided, fading back into the earlier, melodic whistle. The bridge settled into its gentle, hypnotic sway once more. Trembling from head to toe, every muscle screaming in protest, Lyra slowly, carefully rose to her feet. The other side, which had seemed a world away moments before, was now just a few dozen steps. She covered the remaining distance in a daze of focused determination, her movements automatic. When her boot finally landed on the solid, unmoving rock of the far ledge, her knees nearly gave out. She turned to look back at the Bridge of Sighs, now serene and beautiful again, its eerie music once more a gentle hum. It was impossible to reconcile the two versions of it, the tranquil path and the violent trap. The experience left her not with a feeling of triumphant conquest, but with a hollow, shaking vulnerability. Her confidence, carefully rebuilt after each previous trial, was profoundly shaken. The maze had reminded her, in the most visceral way possible, that its nature was absolute unpredictability. It could offer a moment of beautiful, meditative peace, and then, in a heartbeat, transform into a raging engine of destruction. There was no pattern to its cruelty, no formula for its challenges. The only constant was the demand for absolute resilience, for a center of calm that could be found and held on to even when the entire world was screaming and twisting around you. She took a last, long look at the chasm, then turned her back on it, stepping into the next corridor. The bridge was behind her, but its lesson was carved into her nerves. The greatest obstacles were still ahead, and they would require not just strength and cleverness, but a soul-deep stability that could not be shaken. The tunnel she had been traveling through for what felt like an age finally opened up, not into another cramped corridor, but into a space so vast its edges were lost in shadow. This was no mere chamber, it was a cavernous heart, and she could feel its beat. A deep, resonant frequency pulsed through the air, a vibration so low and powerful, it traveled up through the stone floor and into her bones, humming in her teeth and thrumming in her chest. The very air seemed to shimmer with this energy, thick and heavy, charged with the accumulated power of countless ages. And there, suspended in the exact center of this immense space, was the source of it all. The artifact. It was a crystalline orb, about the size of her own head, glowing with a soft internal light that shifted through shades of serene blue, deep violet, and pure white. It was more beautiful than any legend had described, a perfect geometric form that seemed to contain a tiny, captured star. It hung in midair, rotating slowly, and with each turn, it cast prismatic shards of light that danced across the distant walls, illuminating brief glimpses of towering, ancient pillars and impossibly high, vaulted ceilings. But between her and this object of her quest lay the final, most elegant defense. Encasing the orb was a barrier, a sphere of interwoven light and sound that was as beautiful as it was impenetrable. It wasn't a solid wall, but a constantly shifting tapestry of luminous filaments that hummed and crackled with energy. It reminded her of the aurora borealis, given sound and form, a mesmerizing, deadly dance. She could see that the barrier was not static. It pulsed in time with the deep vibration of the chamber, its patterns evolving in a complex, repeating sequence. To simply rush forward would be to be vaporized, reduced to a memory by this ancient, magical safeguard. The maze had tested her strength, her wit, her empathy, and her courage. Now it tested her harmony. It asked if she had learned to listen not just for threats, but for the music of this place. Standing at the edge of the chamber, she closed her eyes, shutting out the awe-inspiring visual spectacle to focus solely on the soundscape. The deep, foundational hum was the bass note, the bedrock upon which everything else was built. Layered over it were the higher, shimmering frequencies of the barrier itself, a celestial chorus that rose and fell in a specific, intricate melody. The key wasn't to break the barrier, it was to join it, to prove she was not an invader to be repelled, but a part of the labyrinth's own song. She had to mimic its natural frequencies, to resonate in sympathy with it. Opening her eyes, she began to experiment, her movements slow and reverent. She tapped a fingernail gently against a nearby stalagmite that seemed to be part of the chamber's structure. The note it produced was dull and flat, causing the barrier filaments to flare briefly with a hostile red light. Wrong note. She tried again, this time humming a steady, low tone, matching the pitch of the chamber's core vibration as closely as she could. The barrier shimmered, the light filaments seeming to slow their frantic dance for a fraction of a second. Encouraged, she walked a slow circle around the perimeter of the chamber, her boots scuffing softly on the stone, her voice a constant, steady hum. She found that different parts of the wall responded to different tones. A smooth, obsidian-like section resonated with a clear, high C when she brushed her palm across it. A formation of crystalline rock sang with a pure, bell-like tone when she tapped it gently. It was a lock, and she was searching for the sonic combination. Remembering the patterns from the Garden of Stone and the Chamber of Reflections, she began to piece together a sequence, tapping and humming, creating a simple, repeating melody that wove itself into the barrier's own complex song. With each correct tone, each harmonious addition, the glowing sphere of light and sound around the artifact seemed to soften, its vibrations becoming less aggressive, more welcoming. The filaments parted slightly, like a curtain being drawn back, creating a narrow, shimmering pathway leading directly to the waiting orb. She was doing it. She was playing the heart of the labyrinth, and it was opening for her. But harmony is a delicate thing, easily shattered by dissonance. Just as she found the final sequence, a perfect chord that made the barrier become almost transparent, a new sound ripped through the chamber, violent and brutal, and utterly out of tune. It was a roar, not a distant echo this time, but a deafening, guttural blast of pure fury that shook dust from the ceiling and overwhelmed the delicate frequencies she had been cultivating. The Minotaur, her efforts, her beautiful, precise harmony, had been a beacon, a clarion call that had led it directly to its treasure and to her. The roar was followed by the unmistakable, thunderous impact of its charge, the sound of a massive body moving with terrifying speed through a stone passageway, growing rapidly louder. The barrier, reacting to the violent intrusion, flared back to its full, defensive intensity, the pathway snapping shut, the filaments now crackling with angry, white-hot energy. The time for subtlety, for music, was over. The artifact was right there, almost within reach, but the final, most primal test was charging straight for her. The confrontation was no longer imminent. It was here. The deep, foundational hum of the chamber was instantly obliterated by a sound that was pure physical force. A roar of such primal fury that it wasn't just heard. It was felt as a pressure wave against her skin, a vibration that shook her ribs and rattled her teeth. The Minotaur was no longer approaching. It was here. The thunderous impact of its hooves against the stone floor was a rapid, accelerating drumbeat of destruction, each one landing with the force of a landslide, and Lyra could feel the vibrations traveling up through her legs, a terrifying seismic warning that the beast was charging down the final corridor straight for the heart of the chamber. There was no time for harmony, no time for the careful, resonant unlocking she had nearly completed. The barrier around the artifact flared with a violent, defensive crimson, reacting to the monster's rage-filled dissonance, but its attention was divided, its energy scattered. This was her only chance. Instinct took over. Lyra lunged forward, not with a careful step, but with a desperate, final leap, her hands outstretched toward the glowing orb. She didn't try to pass through the barrier. She plunged directly into its shimmering, chaotic center. The moment her fingers closed around the cool, impossibly smooth surface of the crystalline artifact, the world exploded in light and sound. The barrier didn't just open, it shattered, not with a crash, but with a single, perfect, resonant chime, a note of such clarity and power that it cut through the Minotaur's roar like a knife. The wave of pure sonic energy radiated outwards, visible as a ripple in the air, and it struck the charging beast head-on. The Minotaur stumbled, its charge broken, its massive head shaking from side to side, as if swatting at a swarm of invisible bees. The brilliant, intelligent fury in its eyes clouded over with confusion and disorientation. She had stolen its prize, and in doing so, had created a weapon from the very air itself, but the weapon's effect was fleeting. She had seconds, maybe less. The artifact hummed in her hands, a steady, warm vibration that was both comforting and alarming. It felt alive, its energy syncing with her own frantic heartbeat. But she knew, with a cold certainty, that its beautiful light and resonant hum were not just a reward, they were a beacon. In this place of darkness and echo, she was now carrying the brightest, loudest thing for miles. Every creature in the labyrinth, every trap that responded to energy, every lost soul and spectral guardian would know exactly where she was. She couldn't just run, she had to think. Outrunning the Minotaur in a straight sprint was impossible. Its strength and speed were legendary for a reason, but the maze itself was her only ally. She had spent what felt like a lifetime learning its language, the way sound traveled and twisted in its halls, the deceptive nature of its echoes, the feel of vibrations through stone that could tell her what was around a corner. She knew its spaces, its narrow passages and wide chambers, its dead ends and its hidden shortcuts. This was not a race of speed, it was a game of acoustics and architecture, and she held the key in her hands. Clutching the orb to her chest, its light casting long, frantic shadows that made the towering pillars seem to lean in and watch, she didn't bolt for the most obvious exit. Instead, she darted left, into a narrow fissure in the wall she had noted earlier, a tight squeeze that the massive Minotaur could never follow. It was a detour, a known route that would cost her time, but would put solid rock between her and the beast's immediate rage. The artifact's glow was muffled against her tunic, its hum dampened by her own body. She moved not just with her legs, but with her entire mind, plotting a route that used the maze's own confusing layout against her pursuer. She would use echo chambers to make her footsteps seem to come from 3 directions at once. She would duck into silent alcoves and hold her breath, letting the Minotaur's own thunderous passage mask the sound of her own. She would rely on the map fragment in her pack, not for a direct route out, but to find the most sonically complex and deceptive path, a labyrinth within the labyrinth, designed to baffle and misdirect. Every step was a calculated risk, a choice between speed and stealth, between the promise of the exit and the peril of the hunter. The artifact was safe, but the cost of holding it was to become the most hunted thing in the entire, twisted world of stone and shadow. The prize was won, but the true challenge of escape had only just begun. Adrenaline became her blood, its sharp, metallic taste flooding her mouth as Lyra's legs pistoned beneath her, driving her forward into the maze's shadowy depths. The artifact, clutched tightly to her chest, pulsed with a warm, frantic energy that seemed to sync with her own hammering heart, its soft glow painting the walls in fleeting, frantic strokes of blue and violet. And behind her, a symphony of destruction composed the soundtrack to her flight. The Minotaur's breathing was a constant, wet rasp, a bellows of fury that filled the corridor, its thunderous footfalls landing with the percussive force of stones splitting, each impact sending a fresh tremor through the floor that vibrated up into her bones. It was a terrifying, asthma-like cacophony of heavy, rhythmic breathing and earth-shaking steps, a horrifyingly intimate audio map of the predator hunting her. But within that terror, Lyra found her focus. She didn't just hear the rage, she listened to its nuances. The slight change in the echo told her when the beast rounded a corner. The deepening of its guttural inhalations signaled a fresh surge of speed. The sound was no longer just a warning, it was her radar, and she learned to rid its blips with a desperate, primal clarity. She didn't run blindly. The labyrinth was her only ally, and she used every trick it had taught her, spotting a narrow fissure in the wall ahead, a hairline crack she would have dismissed hours before. She threw herself sideways into the tight space, squeezing through just as a massive, horned head slammed into the stone where she had been, the impact showering her with dust and debris. The Minotaur bellowed in frustration, its bulk too great to follow, and she heard it pull back to find another way. It was a momentary reprieve, bought with scraped skin and a racing heart. She burst from the fissure into a wider junction, and the echoes became her tools. She slapped a palm hard against a specific, resonant section of the wall, the sharp crack echoing down the left-hand passage. Then she turned and sprinted silently down the right, listening as the Minotaur's roar of pursuit followed the deceptive sound, buying her a precious handful of seconds. Her mind, sharper and more focused than it had ever been, raced faster than her feet. She recalled the precious, brittle map fragment in her pack, not for a full route, but for glimpses. A known dead end here, a hidden alcove there, a shortcut that looped back on itself. She wasn't just running away, she was navigating a 3-dimensional sonic chessboard, and the Minotaur was her opponent, a piece of pure, brute force she had to outmaneuver. But the maze was a living board, and the opponent was learning. A thunderous, splintering crash from her left made her flinch, the sound utterly wrong. She risked a glance over her shoulder, and her blood ran cold. The Minotaur was no longer constrained by the corridors. Enraged by her tricks, it lowered its head and simply charged through a wall, its immense shoulders shattering ancient stone and mortar in an explosion of dust and rubble. It wasn't just following the paths, it was rewriting them, creating new, direct routes in its fury, tearing down the very rules of the game. The exit, a concept that had felt tangibly close moments before, now felt like a cruel joke, a shifting mirage that receded with every earth-shattering crash. The stakes weren't just heightening, they were transforming. This was no longer a chase, it was a demolition. Every calculated risk, every clever trick, was rendered obsolete by the beast's raw, world-breaking power. She was being hunted not just by a creature, but by a force of nature that could reshape the prison around her. The relentless pressure became a grinding wheel on her endurance. Her lungs burned, each breath a ragged gasp in the dusty air. Her muscles screamed in protest, heavy with a fatigue that went deeper than bone. But her wit, forged in the fire of countless previous trials, was the one resource that didn't diminish, it sharpened. As the Minotaur burst through another wall ahead of her, cutting off her planned route, she didn't freeze. She dropped and rolled, the beast's sweeping horns missing her by inches, and came up running in a new direction entirely, her mind already recalculating. She used the clouds of dust from its destruction to mask her movements, becoming a ghost in the chaos it created. She dove into chambers she knew were echo chambers, clapping her hands once to create a storm of confusing sound, then slipping out a side entrance while the Minotaur roared, disoriented, in the center. It was a dance on a crumbling floor, a test of how long her body could keep up with the frantic, inventive demands of her mind. With every turn, the exit felt both tantalizingly near and impossibly far, a paradox that fueled her desperation. She could almost smell the fresh air, feel the imagined sun on her face, but between her and that freedom was a whirlwind of rage and stone, and the certainty that a single misstep, a single moment of hesitation, would be her last. The corridor Lyra had been desperately fleeing narrowed abruptly, its walls closing in until they formed a solid, unyielding barrier of cold, damp stone. There was no fissure to squeeze through, no hidden alcove to offer refuge, no last-minute turn to save her. She skidded to a halt, her boots scraping against the rough floor, the sound final and absolute. Behind her, the thunderous footfalls ceased, replaced by the heavy, wet rasp of the Minotaur's breathing as it too halted, blocking the only way out. The chase was over. She was cornered. The beast's massive shadow fell over her, and she could feel the heat of its body and the primal rage rolling off it in waves. This was the moment every legend warned of, the final, violent end for all who dared to trespass in its domain. Every instinct screamed at her to fight, to use the artifact as a bludgeon, to go down swinging. But as she turned slowly to face her doom, the glowing orb still clutched to her chest. A different understanding began to dawn, fragile and quiet, amidst the storm of her fear. Holding the artifact before her like a shield, not of metal but of light, she witnessed a change. The Minotaur took a step forward, its head lowering for a final, goring charge, but the crystalline orb in her hands reacted. Its gentle pulsing glow didn't flare in aggression. Instead, it intensified into a brilliant, yet profoundly soft, radiance, washing over the beast's form. The light did not hurt it. In that luminous bath, Lyra saw not just a monster, but the being within. The matted fur, the powerful muscles coiled for violence, the sharp horns. These were the outer shell. But within its deep, intelligent eyes, she saw something else entirely. A bottomless well of ancient sorrow, a pain so old and ingrained it had become a part of its very flesh. This was not a beast born of malice, but a creature forged from a curse, a prisoner of the same labyrinth that had tried to break her. The artifact was not a weapon, it was a key. And the lock was not on a door, but on a heart. The deep, resonant hum of the orb grew louder, vibrating through her hands and into her very soul. It was a frequency of pure calm, an auditory balm for a centuries-old wound. Without thinking, driven by an empathy that felt deeper and more courageous than any act of violence, Lyra opened her mouth and began to hum. It was not a complex melody, but a single, steady, calming tone, a note she pulled from the very core of her being. She poured all her hard-won understanding into it, the fear she had faced, the whispers she had deciphered, the reflections of her own doubts, the patience learned in the chamber of light and shadow. She harmonized her own fragile human sound with the artifact's ancient, powerful energy, weaving them together into a single, soothing resonance that filled the dead-end corridor. The effect was not immediate, but it was profound. The Minotaur, which had been tense to shatter her against the wall, paused. Its heavy breathing began to slow, the ragged, furious rasps softening into long, deep sighs. The burning aggression in its eyes flickered and faded, replaced by a dawning, bewildered recognition. It was as if it was hearing a song it had forgotten long, long ago, a lullaby from a time before the darkness, before the labyrinth. The sound was a mirror held up to its own trapped spirit, reflecting not the monster it had been forced to become, but the essence of what it once was. The great head, once lowered to kill, slowly rose. The massive shoulders, perpetually hunched in readiness for battle, relaxed. It did not see an enemy before it. It saw a girl holding a light, singing a song of peace. It saw a chance for a different ending. The beast took a single step to the side, its movement slow and deliberate, no longer a threat, but a gesture. It cleared the path. It was allowing her to pass. This choice, to offer understanding instead of meeting violence with violence, required a courage far greater than any battle lust. It asked her to believe in compassion in the face of certain death, to trust that a shared frequency could be more powerful than a sharpened horn. As she walked forward, her hum never wavering, she passed within inches of the creature. She could see the intricate patterns in its fur, smell the ancient dust on its hide, feel the warmth of its body. It was a moment of terrifying, breathtaking intimacy. And as she moved past it, stepping from the dead end back into the open maze, the Minotaur let out a sound that would stay with her forever. It was a soft, shuddering, grateful sigh, a release of breath that held the weight of centuries of loneliness and rage. It was the sound of a curse breaking. Without another look, the great beast turned and melted back into the deep shadows of its labyrinth, not as her hunter, but as another soul, finally finding its own path to rest. The true challenge of the maze was never to defeat the Minotaur, it was to understand it, to comprehend that the heart of the labyrinth was not a place of punishment, but a place of profound, awaited redemption for all who were lost within it. The path ahead, now free from the looming threat of the Minotaur, should have felt clear, a straight line to victory. but the labyrinth, it seemed, had saved its most personal test for last. The artifact in Lyra's hands pulsed with a warm, steady light, casting a gentle glow that pushed back the oppressive shadows, its hum a constant, reassuring companion. It pointed the way, an unwavering beacon toward the exit she had fought so hard to reach. For a few precious moments, she allowed herself to believe the end was truly near, her steps light with a hope she hadn't felt since first stepping into this place. The air even seemed to change, losing its ancient dustiness for a faint, fresh whisper that hinted of open sky and growing things. She could almost taste freedom. Then the world shifted. It wasn't the violent, grinding collapse of stone she had experienced before. This was subtler, more insidious. The walls around her seemed to soften. Not in texture, but in substance, becoming less solid and more like dark, swirling mist. The corridor dissolved around her, and she found herself standing not in a tunnel of stone, but in a series of vast, echoing chambers that had no visible walls or ceiling, only a boundless, shadowy space. And the echoes here were not of sound, but of self. The labyrinth had turned her own mind into the final maze. From the gloom, figures formed from memory and fear. She saw a shimmering image of her father, his face etched not with pride, but with a deep disappointment she had always feared, shaking his head slowly as she held the glowing artifact. A whisper in her own voice slithered through the air. "You only succeeded through luck. You didn't earn this. You are not the hero they will remember." Another chamber showed the spectral guardians from the Garden of Stone, their silent, accusing forms pointing at the map fragment in her pack, their judgment a cold pressure in the air. "Thief," the silence seemed to scream, "you took what was not yours." Each chamber was a perfect recreation of her deepest insecurities, given form and voice by the labyrinth's ancient magic, a final, brutal assault designed to make her doubt everything she had just accomplished. The instinct to crumble was powerful, to drop the artifact and cover her ears, to argue with the phantoms, to get lost in defending herself against charges only she could hear. But the lessons of the maze were now woven into her very fiber. She remembered the whispering walls, how she had learned to distinguish truth from illusion by the quality of the sound. These echoes, these fears, they had a hollow, tinny ring to them, a falseness that resonated wrong against the artifact's pure, steady hum. She remembered the chamber of reflections, where she had faced these same doubts and chosen to accept them without letting them rule her. And she remembered the bridge of sighs, where she had found her center of calm, even as the world itself seemed to be tearing apart around her. Instead of fighting the visions, she did something far more courageous. She acknowledged them. She looked at the image of her disappointed father and whispered, "I understand your fear for me, but I am safe." She looked at the accusing guardians and said, "I took nothing that was not offered." I solved the puzzle. She did not shout. She did not run. She simply held the artifact closer, let its calming frequency merge with her own steady heartbeat, and walk. She moved through the chambers of fear, not with the frantic energy of escape, but with the slow, deliberate confidence of someone who knows their own truth. With each step taken in faith, the illusions lost their power. The fearful echoes grew fainter. The accusing images began to flicker and dissolve like smoke in a breeze. They could not exist in the space of her unwavering certainty. The labyrinth having thrown its worst at her and found her unmoved, seemed to sigh in acceptance. The endless chambers coalesced back into a single, solid corridor of rough, familiar stone, and at the end of it, a sight so beautiful it made her eyes sting. A simple, ragged archway, and beyond it, not darkness, but the glorious, golden light of late afternoon sun filtering through green leaves. The exit, the real one, she walked toward it, her pace steady, no longer a frantic run but a procession. She had not just found the way out, she had earned it. Crossing that final threshold was less a step and more a transformation. The sunlight, real and warm, fell on her face for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. She breathed an air that was sweet with the scent of pine and damp earth, a shocking contrast to the dry, ancient atmosphere of the labyrinth. The weight of the stone ceiling was gone, replaced by the vast, open sky. Behind her, the entrance to the maze was just a dark, unassuming hole in the side of a great mountain, looking small and insignificant against the grandeur of the world. In her hands, the artifact seemed to feel the change. Its brilliant, urgent glow softened into a gentle, placid luminescence, like a candle flame settling after a gust of wind. Its resonant hum faded to a contented, almost sleepy thrum, as if it too was finally at peace, its purpose fulfilled. She had done it. She had navigated the twists and turns, faced the monster and the maze, and emerged not just with a prize, but as someone entirely new. Yet, as she stood there blinking in the sunlight, the echoes of the labyrinth did not vanish. They lingered in the back of her mind, not as fears, but as memories. The soft whisper of the walls, the deep thrum of the chamber's heart, the haunting music of the chasm's wind. They were a permanent part of her now, a reminder that the greatest chaos she would ever face was inside herself, and the profoundest peace she had ever found was in learning to navigate it with a calm and listening heart. The first sensation was the warmth of the sun on her skin, a feeling so simple and profound it brought sudden, unexpected tears to her eyes. After the cool, eternal twilight of the stone labyrinth, the golden light of late afternoon felt like a balm, a gentle welcome back to a world of color and life. The air itself was a revelation, carrying the rich scents of pine, damp earth, and distant wildflowers, a vibrant tapestry of smells that replaced the ancient, dusty atmosphere she had breathed for so long. She stood for a long moment on the mountainside, just outside the now quiet and unassuming entrance to the maze, her chest rising and falling as she simply drank it all in, the artifact in her arms humming with a soft, contented pulse that seemed to harmonize with the rustling of the leaves in the breeze. It wasn't long before they found her. A cry went up from the lookout posted in the valley below, and soon a small crowd was scrambling up the path, the villagers who had watched her enter days before, most of them certain they would never see her again. They approached cautiously at first, their faces etched with a mixture of disbelief and awe, as if they were witnessing a walking ghost. At the front were the elders, the very ones who had doubted her youth and her resolve, their expressions now transformed from skepticism to something akin to reverence. They had expected, if she returned at all, a battered and broken figure, perhaps empty-handed. They were not prepared for the young woman who stood before them, her clothes torn and dusty, her arms bearing the faint scrapes of her journey, but her eyes holding a depth and a calm that had not been there before. And in her hands, she held the impossible, the crystal heart of the labyrinth, glowing with a gentle, internal light. its very presence a silent testament to her success. As they gathered around, their questions tumbling out in an excited, overlapping rush, Lyra knew they wanted a tale of heroic combat, a story of slaying a great beast and smashing through obstacles with brute force. But that was not the story she told. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but clear, carrying a new weight and authority that commanded their complete attention. She spoke not of violence, but of vibration. She described the whispering walls not as a horror, but as a teacher that forced her to listen more deeply than she ever had before. She told them of the Chamber of Reflections and how the true battle was not against the mirrors, but against the doubts they reflected back at her. She explained the Garden of Stone and how she had learned to play its melodies with a gentle touch, earning its gift not through conquest, but through cooperation. And she spoke of the Minotaur, not as a monster to be destroyed, but as a tormented soul to be understood, her voice softening as she described the moment its rage had faded into a sigh of profound relief, a shared moment of empathy that had been the true key to her freedom. Her account transformed the myth for everyone listening. The Minotaur's Labyrinth was no longer just a deadly trap for foolish adventurers. It became a place of profound psychological and spiritual trial. The artifact in her hands was not merely a trophy of conquest, but a tool of harmony, its value lying in the soothing, resonant frequencies it emitted. Following her guidance, the villagers built a simple, open-air temple on a nearby hillside, a place of tranquility where the crystal heart was placed on a pedestal of natural stone. There, anyone burdened by grief, anxiety, or fear could come and sit, allowing the orb's gentle, subsonic hum to wash over them, its harmonious vibrations offering a solace that words could not, a tangible piece of the peace Lyra had found in the heart of the chaos. Lyra herself was celebrated, her name sung in songs and her story woven into tapestries. Yet, amidst the admiration and the newfound respect, she carried a quiet understanding that set her apart. The labyrinth had changed her on a fundamental level. The young woman who had entered was driven by a need to prove herself. The woman who emerged was guided by a hard-won knowledge of her own strength and a deep capacity for empathy. She knew that a part of her would always remain within those twisting stone corridors, not as a prisoner, but as a student who had graduated. In the quiet moments of her life, when the wind whistled through a narrow alley, or she heard the distant, resonant tone of a struck bell, she would feel a familiar echo in her soul, a reminder of the lessons learned in the dark. Those whispers were no longer threats. They were a source of inner strength, a wellspring of calm to draw from when facing new challenges. The world was full of unseen labyrinths, not of stone, but of the heart and mind, and she now possessed the map to navigate them all. Her greatest adventure, she realized, was not behind her, but ahead, and she faced its first step not with trepidation, but with a quiet, unshakable confidence. Standing there in the warm sunlight, the crystal heart cradled in her arms, Lyra felt the solid ground beneath her feet, not as an end, but as a beginning. The labyrinth was sealed behind her, a closed chapter of shadow and stone, yet its presence was more vivid within her than any physical artifact could ever be. She looked down at the orb, its gentle light, now a soft, steady companion, rather than a desperate prize, and understood with a clarity that settled deep in her bones. This object, for which she had risked everything, was not the true treasure she had gone in to find. It was merely a symbol, a beautiful, tangible echo of the real transformation that had occurred in the silent chambers of her own spirit. The true reward was the profound and lasting change in how she moved through the world, a new way of listening that went far beyond the reach of her ears. The challenges she faced within the maze had been a brutal and beautiful forge, reshaping her from the inside out. The constant, shifting uncertainty taught her a patience she never knew she possessed, a stillness that could be maintained even when the walls were closing in. The need to rely on intuition over sight, to trust the subtle hum of a truth, felt rather than seen, had honed her inner senses to a razor's edge, and the courage she discovered was not the absence of fear, but the strength to move forward with that fear as her companion, to choose empathy over violence when faced with the beast of her own nightmares. She had entered the labyrinth, seeking to prove her strength to others, but she emerged having made peace with herself, a far more valuable victory, and it was the very texture of the labyrinth's challenges, the Asmer-like tapestry of sounds, vibrations, and rhythms, that had been her greatest teacher. The low, resonant hum of the chamber's heart, the soft, melodic whistling of the chasm's wind, the delicate chime of the barrier shattering, the terrifyingly intimate rhythm of the Minotaur's breath. These were not merely obstacles to be endured. They were a language, learning to listen to them, to distinguish the deceptive whisper from the guiding tone, to find a steady rhythm in the midst of chaos, forced her to turn that same deep listening inward. She learned to hear the subtle vibrations of her own intuition, to feel the resonant truth of her own choices, and to recognize the discordant notes of her own fear before they could spiral into panic. The maze taught her that the most important sounds to listen for are the ones that never make a noise at all, the quiet pull of instinct, the steady beat of her own heart, the inner harmony of a decision that just feels right. Now, as she returns to the rhythms of everyday life, she discovers that the labyrinth's echoes never truly fade. They have become a permanent part of her internal landscape, a source of strength and reflection she can draw upon at any moment. The whisper of wind through autumn leaves carries the same haunting melody as the chasm's bridge, reminding her to find her center when life feels unsteady. The resonant tone of a distant bell evokes the pure chime of the artifact, a prompt to seek harmony over conflict. Even the low hum of a city at night recalls the deep pulse of the maze heart, a vibration that grounds her in the present. These are not triggers for fear, but gentle reminders of the wisdom she earned in the dark. They are proof that the skills forged in extreme circumstances are not locked away there. They are precisely what equip us to navigate the ordinary labyrinths of our lives, the complex challenges at work, the tangled emotions of relationships, the silent battles with our own doubts. Every challenge, no matter how daunting, holds these hidden harmonies, these subtle clues and rhythms waiting to be discovered not by the swift or the strong, but by those willing to move through them with heart, with mindfulness, and with the courage to listen more deeply than they ever